I didn't know how long I sat frozen in my seat, staring out the window at the swirling darkness outside. The note still clutched tightly in my hand. Time had begun to feel wrong. Minutes stretched and warped, and the low hum of the plane seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as though it were speaking directly to me. I wanted to tell myself it was just nerves, just imagination, but every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. The passengers around me remained eerily still, their eyes vacant, fixed on nothing at all. I tried to catch the gaze of the person sitting next to me, a young man in a grey hoodie, but he didn't blink, didn't react when I nudged him. It was as though he existed only half in this world, a shell of a person, waiting for something unseen. My stomach churned, and I gripped the armrest so hard I thought my knuckles might crack. Then, the lights flickered again. This time, for just a fraction of a second, the cabin plunged into darkness, and in that brief shadow, I thought I saw movement in the aisles, shapes moving against the rows of seats, impossible forms that didn't belong to anyone on this plane. When the lights returned, everything looked normal, as if nothing had happened. But the air felt heavier, colder, charged with an invisible energy. I glanced at the flight attendant who had given me the note. She was nowhere in sight. The regular crew moved about silently, smiling politely at passengers. But I knew now that they weren't ordinary. Something about them was wrong. Their movements were just slightly too precise, too fluid, too calculated, and their smiles never reached their eyes. I tried to distract myself, pretending to read the in-flight magazine, but the words blurred together, twisting into shapes and symbols I couldn't recognize. The hum of the engine seemed to seep into my mind, filling it with whispers I could barely comprehend. Each syllable was a warning, a plea I couldn't quite decipher. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze pass my ear. I looked around, heart hammering. The air conditioning vents were all normal, and yet the chill was localized, like a ghostly hand brushing against my skin. My eyes darted across the cabin, and I realized, with sudden horror, that the empty rows near the back of the plane were no longer empty. Shadows shifted there, coalescing into shapes that shouldn't have been possible. Faces, blurred, faceless, staring, peered at me from the darkness. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The note in my hand felt heavier, almost burning, as if it were alive. I wanted to throw it away, to crumple it and forget this whole nightmare, but I couldn't. It was my anchor, the only proof that someone, something, was trying to protect me. The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice came through. At first it was calm, professional, routine, but then it changed. The words slowed, warped, echoing as though they were coming from a distance, far beyond the plane itself. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are experiencing conditions outside that are unusual. I clenched my jaw. Unusual. That was the understatement of the century. I looked at the other passengers again. Still vacant, still unreactive. Not one person around me seemed aware of the warning, the danger, the reality that the plane itself had become something else entirely. A sudden shudder ran through the cabin, stronger than turbulence. My head snapped forward as a deep vibration rattled the seats beneath me. The overhead bins rattled slightly, and I saw a few items wobble on the cart the flight attendant was pushing. But no one around me panicked. No one except me. I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket. Hesitant, I pulled it out. There were no notifications, no calls, no messages. Just a single image that hadn't been there a second ago. A photograph of the note I held in my hand, taken from above, showing the words, "Do not get on this plane," as if someone, or something, was watching me, sending me proof that my fear was real. I dropped the phone, trembling. My eyes snapped to the aisle, and there she was, the same flight attendant. Only this time, She was standing in the middle of the cabin, staring directly at me. Her face was pale, her expression solemn, her eyes wide with urgency. Without a word, she raised her hand and motioned toward the back of the plane. Something in my gut told me to obey. I slipped from my seat as quietly as I could, moving down the aisle, my heart pounding with each step. The other passengers remained motionless, vacant shells in their seats. The closer I got to the rear of the plane, the darker it became. The lights seemed to dim intentionally, casting long stretching shadows across the ceiling. When I reached the back, I realized the lavatories were all locked. There was no bathroom, no closet, nothing at all, just the endless metallic walls of the aircraft stretching into darkness. But then I saw it, a faint glow coming from one of the storage compartments near the galley. The flight attendant stood next to it, holding a key I hadn't seen before. She handed it to me without a word. My hands shook as I took it, feeling a strange warmth radiating from the metal. The note burned in my pocket, a reminder that every second counted. I opened the compartment, revealing a narrow passage I had never noticed before, leading to a space that didn't seem like it belonged on an ordinary plane. The walls were lined with panels that shimmered, almost fluid, and a faint hum filled the small corridor. The air smelled of ozone and metal, sharp and electric. "Follow me," the flight attendant whispered. I obeyed. As I stepped inside, I noticed something horrifying. The back wall of the plane was no longer there. Outside, there was nothing but a swirling void of clouds and darkness, moving in impossible patterns. Lightning flashed, illuminating shapes within the storm. Shapes that looked like twisted figures. Reaching toward the plane as if it were bait, my stomach turned. I wanted to run back, to escape to my seat, to pretend none of this was real. But instinct, or maybe fear, kept me moving forward. The flight attendant led me to a small cabin tucked behind what I could only describe as a shimmering curtain of air. Inside, there was a single chair and a small panel of buttons and levers I had never seen on any plane before. The air thrummed with energy, and I realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a plane. It was a vessel, a bridge between our world and something else, something cursed. "Sit," she commanded softly. I obeyed, my legs trembling. She crouched beside me, her eyes locking onto mine. "This flight," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "has been cursed for decades. Every passenger who boards without knowing becomes part of it. The plane chooses them. Some it keeps forever, others," she shivered, emotion so subtle I almost missed it, "others it lets go. You were warned, but it's not over. You must understand, the moment you agreed to fly, you were already in its grip." I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but the hum of the aircraft filled every corner of my mind, drowning out rational thought. "Why me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why warn me if I was going to be trapped anyway?" She hesitated, looking away. "Because some of us fight back. Some of us try to survive long enough to remember. The note? It's a lifeline. It's the only way you can make it out alive." I glanced down at the paper in my hand. The words seemed to shimmer now, glowing faintly red in the dim light. The ink pulsed. Alive. Alive. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and the plane shuddered again. I looked out the small window beside the chair, and what I saw froze my blood. The clouds outside weren't clouds. They were faces. Countless screaming faces, all twisted in agony, all pressing against the invisible walls of this cursed flight. I realized, in that terrifying moment, that the plane had a consciousness. It was aware of every soul on board, aware of every heartbeat, every thought, every fear. And it had chosen me. The flight attendant's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "Listen carefully," she said. "There is a way to survive, but it will demand everything from you. Courage, will, and the willingness to see the truth no one else can." My heart pounded. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The void outside the plane seemed to pulse with every beat, every breath. I had no idea what awaited, but I knew now that the note hadn't been a warning. It had been a key to survival, and I had no choice but to follow it.